Okay. What's going on, guys? So, I hope you had a great week the last week since we last chatted, and continue with the theme of having a conversation, checking in, and just telling you guys what I've been working on. So, for this week, what I want to talk about is a few core things. So, we're going to talk about unlocking hockey confidence, we're going to talk about hockey IQ, we're going to talk about emotional mastery, we're going to talk about predictive awareness. And really, this week was a lot of digging into kind of these more core topics to hockey. And then we're going to dig into some more kind of nuances within those. So just continuing this core topic of understanding what it means to be confident, understanding the keys to preparation, which leads to that confidence. So for the first topic, I want to dig into consciousness, awareness, and prediction. And so the core idea I want to get into is that consciousness is basically the bridge, the gap between prediction and reality, enabling adaptability and faster decision making in hockey. So this sounds really weird. This is very like abstract. I understand. I'm not expecting you to hear this and say this makes total sense right off the bat. Really what I want to get into is it's basically understanding, first of all, what consciousness kind of is, at least my belief around it. And I was just listening to a few different conversations and a few different kind of lectures around this. And all of this really comes down to what I call the adaptability principle. And basically what this means is that we as a like aware being, so like the fact that we have awareness of what's going on, the fact that we have senses, and we can also be aware of that we have thoughts, we can be aware that we have emotions. Basically, consciousness exists to resolve the mismatch between the prediction we have and then what actually happens in the world. And really, this is what drives learning and drives adaptation. Essentially, our consciousness is the thing that allows us to say, something just happened and it was different than what I thought was going to happen. And consciousness is kind of that thing that's kind of trying to understand how to connect those two things, how to bring how to really what it's trying to do is it's trying to bring together the prediction and what actually happened. And you're trying to tighten this gap. And if you think about it, what is hockey IQ? In many ways, hockey IQ is you think something's going to happen and then you understand, okay, something does happen. And if those are really far apart, then typically you have bad hockey IQ in general. And then if you have really high hockey IQ, it's like close. You could kind of call this anticipation, which I guess fundamentally is more of a subcomponent of IQ. But this argument that I was listening to from a few different people was this concept that you basically, if consciousness would not really matter, you wouldn't need to be kind of aware of things if your prediction was perfect. So if you could just predict, okay, the puck is going to go here and you always knew where it was going to be, you wouldn't really need to worry about senses. And really like think about this for a second. If you knew with certainty the puck was going to be 5 strides away from you at this exact time, you would be like a god. You would know exactly what's going to happen and you would just go there. Now, what we teach in a lot of our courses, a lot of our programs, is helping players to understand how to actually manipulate the play and start to push the play and encourage the play to do what we want it to do. Thus, us being conscious of what we think is going to happen, we start to do different deceptive movements. We set different angles up to essentially start to create more predictable patterns for ourselves so that we essentially it's more conscious. We're more aware of what's happening. And funny enough, the guy that I work with, Conscious Hockey, or Xander, that's exactly what he calls it, right? Conscious hockey. It's becoming aware of, okay, I can start to manipulate the play. I can start to do certain things. And this is what the best players are doing. And they're manipulating the play, getting people to move where they want through the actions they're taking. And it's a weird concept, but it's really interesting when you start to realize so much of how to improve this comes from asking the question, how do I get better at predicting what's going to happen next? And if you think about what's going to cause better prediction or how to know what's going to happen next, it's probably from being in those situations a lot. If you think about what the best athletes in the world are best at, and there's tons of studies around this, they have experience. They read cues more effectively. They know if somebody does this thing, they're more likely to do this next. And so they get better at reading and responding to different situations. Fundamentally, when we talk about influencing the play, I believe that when we say we're influencing the play, we're not really just spontaneously, like we're not doing this out of nowhere. We're typically doing something, so we could take a random action, but it's in response to something that's happening in the game. If the puck's in the corner, we can take a certain angle, which then influences the play, but we're still taking that first action because the puck's in the corner. We're always responding to what's occurring in the game. And so a more experienced player is somebody who has been through so many different situations and seen so many different plays that they start to understand what's going to happen. Now, how can you apply this to your game? Well, think about how much film are you watching? How much film are you looking at in terms of your game, in terms of your team, in terms of your league? Start to think about what would it take for me to be able to start to just read what's going to happen more often. Well, of course, watching the NHL is going to help, but the only challenge with watching the NHL primarily is that you're not getting good at predicting what people around you are doing. You're talking about like levels above you. You want to start to look at what do players do in my league, starting to look at in what situations, why do people make certain decisions? What is their thought process? And if you can start to think about what is the sequence of behaviors they're taking, which is fundamentally how we extract the thought process, is we look at what someone does and then we guess what they're thinking, or we ask them what they're thinking, but it's always a reflection of looking at the behavior. It's looking at what happened. And so film doesn't lie. You always have the film. You always see the process. You see, okay, here's the person moved this way, they moved this way, and think about what were the reasons they may have done that. Look at the other physical things around them and start to understand, okay, so this player's tendency is to do this when this occurs, or when this occurs, or when this and this. And we become scientists of the game. We become, again, somebody who's just looking at what's happening and learning how to better predict. And so being more conscious, being somebody who's able to make quicker decisions, it's all the same. It's all connected to your ability to be so deeply present and aware of what's going on and understand the different cues and have effective, quick responses to those cues. And you have to see more film. You have to experience more hockey. This is why my recommendation is that if you want to fast track and become a more experienced player, is play as much as you can, watch as much film as you can, and visualize so that you put yourself in those situations that you've seen and experienced many, many times. Something I'm going to be talking about very soon, which you may already see, is the concept of, after a game, write down all of the situations that you saw that you made a mistake or you didn't do what you wanted to do. Write those down and then go through and visualize them 10, 20 times and see yourself doing what you want to do. What you're doing is you're building experience because you have a real life situation, and now practice being in that situation over and over and over again, and you're going to train your brain to make a different decision in that cue when that cue comes up. When a guy comes in and cuts a certain way, if you repeatedly rewire your brain to respond a certain way, you're giving your brain experience. You're training your brain to do what you want. The problem most players have is that they just can't visualize effectively. They just don't have the tools. They don't have the repetition, so they're not able to recreate these experiences. But realistically, a player who's played for 20 years is going to have better experience. A player who has played for 20 years has just had more experiences. That's what experience is more events that they've been through, more repetitions of different situations. They have more of a wide variety, and their brain is better at predicting. They're more conscious of the game fundamentally. Even if you're not aware of it, your brain is able to better predict what's going to happen next. So that's what you want to get better at. If you want to be a better player, get better at predicting what's going to happen next. And so I believe there's a concept called the lagging measure rule. Basically, it's that performance outcomes reflect the cumulative effect of preparation and adaptability. For example, if you consistently practice, if you consistently review game film, if you consistently visualize, that is going to lead to you making in-game decisions. And it seems obvious, but there's a lot of players, including potentially you, who are not effectively doing this. You're skipping out on this. And maybe it's because you don't have the motivation, you don't have the drive to do it. But a lot of times it's because you don't believe it's going to work. If you believe that getting the thing you want is going to make you feel better, and you believe that a certain action is going to get you to that outcome, then you will take the actions. So there's either some issue with the wanting of the outcome, or there's an issue with the belief in the actions you need to take to get there. Figure out what it is, get clear on it, and then you will take action. You'll do the thing you know you need to do. So here's my recommendation for what you can take away and what you can start doing. So first of all, I recommend doing visualization drills. I would do 10 minutes every day, 10 minutes before games. I'd be imagining, okay, what patterns do I want to be looking for? How can I anticipate what outcomes I want to generate? So get clear on, okay, what are the cues I keep running into? What are the cues that I can look for? How do I want to respond? You're training your brain. After games, I'd recommend doing a game debrief. So after each game, I would pinpoint moments where your predictions did work or your predictions failed, and then adjust the strategy. Go and do the visualization reps after the game and train your brain to respond how you want. Create a new hypothesis, create a new strategy, go test it out and see what happens. This is how you reframe going into games as something scary to going into games as something to learn, something to improve yourself. Games are a chance to test and see what works, what doesn't, and then you can make adaptations. And then the last super obvious one is just doing things that expand your ability to be conscious. So my recommendation is to meditate. My recommendation is to do something where you practice opening your focus. In the free school group I actually have a whole meditation course on this, so you can feel free to check that out if you want. And the whole point of it is when you learn to take your focus in different directions, it gives you a better ability to absorb the right information, to absorb where players are around you, and then being able to center in and dial in the focus into what you need to pay attention to. So my core takeaway, or the core takeaway I want you to have generally, is that consciousness isn't just about being aware, it's the ability to adapt when reality deviates from your predictions. Mastering this skill sharpens your hockey IQ and gives you the ability to separate from other players. So it's not just about noticing what's going on the ice, but it's your ability to consciously notice, this is what I thought was going to happen. It didn't happen. Let's adjust. And you are developing your consciousness, at least based on the current definition I have. So that's a kind of cool thought experiment type conversation, but I hope that helps. And some books you can look into for this are Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Kind of looks into like exploring intuitive thinking, reflection and decision making. You can look at The Rise of Superman by Stephen Kotler. This talks about flow state and high performance. There's also some research from Erickson et al. This is from 1993, talking about like the process of how expert athletes see the game. And then you can also look into some different meditation tools from myself, people like Joe Dispenza. There's a whole bunch of different ones on YouTube, but you can kind of start to explore that. Okay, now the second topic I want to get into is confidence versus self-esteem in hockey. So it's my belief that confidence grows from preparation and realistic self-assessment, while self-esteem often lacks the foundation of sustained effort and growth. Said a more simple way, I believe confidence comes down to actually doing stuff. Confidence builds through preparing yourself, through dealing with whatever mental blocks you have, through building the 4 core pillars of performance. I don't believe that you should try to build your self-esteem per se, because there's a lot of studies, there's no real actual evidence that building your self-esteem really does lead to long-term success. You may find a few like random studies that kind of point to it, but if you look at any like meta-analysis, there's no true proof that like self-esteem is the core variable. So you want to start to question, is self-esteem really the problem? Is it that I don't love myself enough per se? Is it that I don't really like have this kind of almost artificial confidence? The way that I would look to build true confidence, and this is how I define confidence, is it's the belief that you will either succeed or you will learn and adapt, and you can handle whatever comes your way, because even if you fail, you are not going to be broken. You will continue to move forward. Once you start to define confidence like that, you realize It's not about being this kind of almost like just guessing at what's going to happen. You're not just saying, I think this is going to happen, which fundamentally is more prediction. Like, really, when most people, the true definition of confidence, not how I define it, but like the normal definition of confidence is it's basically a scale of how likely something is to happen. I think that that is a somewhat helpful way to look at confidence, but it's if you don't have a lot of evidence, then you need something else. And so that's why I define deep confidence as you can handle whatever comes your way. You know you're going to either succeed or learn, and there's no fear involved in that. To me, that's a much better way to approach sport. It's a much better way to approach anything, because if you're constantly in this kind of like self-esteem mode of trying to build yourself up, and you're constantly trying to like justify, like, I find a way to believe in myself, as opposed to saying, look, I know I can make it through. I know I'm going to find a way because I know who I am. And this kind of ties to that concept of identity. Knowing who you are and knowing that you're going to continue to improve and grow removes the fear of, if this doesn't go the way I predicted, then it's over. Instead, you just accept whatever comes your way, and you're able to accept and then take action, accept and take action. This is really DBT, or acceptance and commitment therapy in action. And so something Dr. Jordan Peterson talks about, which kind of connects to this, is if you're over reliant on feeling good about yourself without action, it's going to lead to complacency. And so what I mean by this is that, or what he means by this is, if you're constantly reliant on trying to just feel good all the time, and you try to feel good through just doing mental things to just like boost your self-esteem, say, I love myself, I believe in myself. By all means, that's good if you're taking the actions. But it's my opinion that if you really want to become a better person, become better at something, improve, the true long-term process is taking action, then feeling gratitude for that action, giving yourself that psychological reward, and allowing that to be what drives essentially your self-esteem is the inputs. It's the actions you're taking, and it's not about the outcomes. It's also not about just trying to convince yourself you feel good. Because if you make yourself feel good before you go train and you're like, I'm good, I'm already complete, I don't need to do anything else, then why would you do extra work? And this is why I think there's this concept that Olympians are kind of broken. Like, people talk about this, like Olympians are kind of messed up in the head. And the reason I see this is because Olympians are willing to sacrifice everything to accomplish something that many people don't consider important. So you have to kind of step into, what is the path, what is the journey I'm going on? And then you have to block everything else out, because distractions are what pull you off the path. Distractions pull you into some other thing. And whatever that other thing is, it takes away from the steps you could have taken towards where you're trying to go. So this is what it looks like to be macro focused. Macro focused is big picture. How consistently are you stepping towards where you want to go? Typically, success for most players comes down to just how many consistent steps did you take in the right direction. And sometimes you can think you're taking steps in the right direction, but really you're taking steps in a totally wrong direction mechanically, like you're learning to skate really, really poorly. And I've seen guys fail because of this. They could have probably been NHL players. They were world class at a young age, but they took steps in the wrong direction. You also see this happen with drinking and partying. You can see this with getting involved with like illegal activity, or it could be getting in relationships and then pursuing relationships over the sport. I'm not telling you anything is right or wrong, but what I'm telling you is that if your goal is to move towards a certain path, having macro focus and not getting pulled to the sides is really what matters. And if you are focused on building self-esteem through simply just in your head making yourself feel better, well then that may lead you to get complacent and just stay in the same place. But it may also lead you to saying, well, I don't really want to pursue this thing that I have in this goal, because you say, I don't need to. I'm just going to pursue something else. And it's a balancing act for a lot of players, but I'm speaking to the ones who want to be the best, to people who want to be the most successful. If you want to be the most successful player, take a note right now. Think about it for yourself. Am I being pulled and distracted by other things? And then really ask yourself, yes, like maybe I enjoy this, maybe it boosts my self-esteem in the moment, but is that action really going to lead me to taking steps towards who I want to be? Maybe not. There's a good chance it's not. And so connected to this, something you can start to think about is leveraging dissatisfaction, leveraging negative emotions, and using them as fuel. Now, this can be psychologically a little bit harmful. So I'm not telling you to do this if your goal is to be the happiest you can be. But if you look at many of the best athletes, if you're dealing with frustration, if you're dealing with troubles, if you have a negative emotion, you can use it. And think about it this way. Negative emotions really signal areas for improvement. They're oftentimes not barriers. They're oftentimes your brain kind of subconsciously telling you, you should look at this thing. You should consider changing this thing. There's something wrong. It's a signal. It's a survival mechanism. We have emotions to warn us about things. We have emotions to warn us about bad people, about dangerous things, about looking over a cliff we might fall, about a lion coming at us. Our body has these emotions, but it's coming from our brain getting a signal from the world. We have some kind of emotional response. It basically tells the body like fight, flight, or freeze. Fundamentally, there's other responses emotions give us, but then boom, it then signals action. So what you can start to do is when you do get negative signals from the brain, like, hey, we're not good enough, hey, we might fail, realize that these are signals that there's something you probably need to also take action on. There might be a negative belief you've developed through some kind of somewhat traumatic or just negative experience where your brain created a defense mechanism and said, hey, we turned the puck over in the slot that one time and the other team went and scored. Let's not make any risky plays in the slot again. When in reality, you probably need to do that, speaking in the offensive zone, in order to create chances in the future. So that is a protective mechanism. That is a mental block that is developed. That's a block. That's something that's stopping you. But if you get negative emotions from knowing, hey, I'm not very good at this thing. Hey, I've been slacking on my cardio. I haven't been working on my speed. I haven't been working on my focus. If that stuff comes up, well, then maybe it's a signal that you should take some action and actually work on that stuff. Start to think about maybe I need to actually just change and do different stuff. That's what negative emotions can be, and you can use them to fuel new actions which lead to different outcomes. So don't think of negative emotions as something to be avoided, and don't think of them as like always harming your ego, always harming your self-esteem. Sometimes you need to pay attention to what they are. They're not always wrong. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't, but it's looking at them. It's mindfulness, it's awareness, it's noticing, is this emotion actually coming from a place of genuine need to change, or is it just coming from whatever? Now, I've talked about this the last couple of weeks, but it's something I want to drive home for everybody because it is important to consider. And so this is where the concept of being able to balance confidence with humility comes in, because you need to be able to recognize who you are and have your strengths understood, understand your identity, but at the same time, you need to look for feedback that helps you. I talked about the concept of, do I have a healthy ego? A healthy ego is something that looks for opportunity to grow. It looks for feedback. But a weak ego is somebody who says they're confident and then avoids feedback and says, I'm good enough, I'm where I need to be. And I'll tell you what, I used to be like that. I used to always try to avoid feedback. I used to hate when people criticize me because I always took it as a shot towards who I am and pulled away from my strengths. But the truth is, when people gave me feedback, I should have really listened, took what they said, and said, can I use this to drive me forward? And the negative feeling I got from it was probably the fact that my ego didn't like that it was true. A lot of times that's the case. And so when someone chirps you, when someone makes fun of you, so when someone judges you and you get a negative feeling, go and process that feeling after the fact and figure out, what is my body trying to tell me? What is my subconscious mind trying to signal? Because I'm responding to what they're saying. Something's happening. And is this a helpful belief that I need to rewire? Do I need to remove the mental block? Or is this a signal that I need to improve? There are two really key things within that. One is something you need to remove. One is something that you need to acknowledge and then use as fuel to drive you forward to take new actions. And so a few things you can do to start to improve this is you can do something called performance journaling. So after games, you can start to track, okay, how many shots did I produce? How many hits did I make? How many zone entries did I do? Start to reflect on how did I actually perform? What actions did I take? What results did I get? And then you can start to look at, well, did I actually execute on those things or did I not? Did I do the things I said I needed to do? Did those lead to the results? And when you start to kind of process that, when you start to reflect on what did I do? What did I get? And then pull that back and say, what is that feedback? What do I need to change about my actions? And a lot of times you'll get a signal that something needs to change, and this informs your training. And then your training becomes informed by performance, which is something I call performance informed training. I recommend looking at what you need to work on, using your performance informed training, but also using that feedback to inform how you do your routines, your morning routine, your pre-practice, your post-practice, your pre-game, your post-game, your night routines. Let this inform all the different routines you have. And then for self-talk, I want you to start to think of when you have negative self-talk, when you start ripping on yourself, notice it and start to reframe it into, I'll improve this. So if you make a mistake defensively, it's saying, I'm going to improve this. I'm better at that. I know I can get there. I know I'm already there, right? Reminding yourself, and this is the key nuance, is when you start to say, I know I'm already there. I am this way. Be careful that you're not doing that to kind of cover up the signal that I need to improve it. So knowing directionally you're headed in the right direction is good. And it's also important to realize that at times you need to switch that self-talk into, I am this way. I am that. Or I'm working on that. I am moving towards the right direction. Knowing the distinction is key. I'm not going to get into it here. That's a whole nother conversation. And then the third topic I want to talk about is emotional regulation and leadership. And so the core idea is that effective leadership is balancing emotions and emotional awareness with assertiveness so that you can really build teamwork, resilience, and accountability. And what I really mean by this is that if you want to be an effective leader, you have to understand what other players are dealing with, how they're feeling. That's emotional intelligence, like being able to look at somebody and understand what they're dealing with. And you have to balance this kind of having empathy for what players are dealing with, whether they're going through a slump, whether they're trying to break into the next line. And obviously, as players, we're dealing with our own stuff, but use what you're dealing with to relate to other players. If you're going through a tough time with your coach, if you're going through a tough time with a team or with an agent or whatever it is, you have to be able to acknowledge and connect with other players. This is a social skill. And I've talked with so many guys at the junior level that if you want to succeed at the junior level, even college level, at pro level, emotional intelligence, understanding what people are dealing with, being able to connect with people is way more important than we realize. Because if you're hated by your teammates, if no one likes you, they all want you away from them, you're not going to have success. It's going to lead you to have problems. Now, I don't say that from the perspective of, yeah, of course, if you're just the best, if you're dominant, of course, you can be if you're let's say, like, I guess Nail Yakupov was kind of like that. But if you look at like truly the best players, like Crosby, Ovechkin, you look at like Stamkos, you look at Kucherov, Point, Barkov, whatever. Like any of these guys, they do tend to be good social leaders. And they understand how to connect with teammates. And they have the assertive leadership. They're able to set standards. They hold standards. They drive people to perform and stay true to what they committed to. And having this balance is really key. And that's why I call it the leadership balance, because you need to be somebody who connects and understands and who is empathetic, and you have to be able to be assertive and clear. And the difference here is the difference between being kind and being nice. And I learned this from someone named Layla Hermosi, who's built a whole bunch of like multi-million-dollar companies, and she's kind of the operator within those companies. And she talks about being nice is somebody who says something to make people feel good. It's managing emotions. But being kind is somebody who says what needs to be said so the person gets what they need to get, so they get the results or get what they want out of life. The difference is so key, because if you're the person who's always trying to make people feel good, yes, they'll feel good in the short term, but they'll probably hate you in the long term because they didn't do the thing they needed to do. They didn't help you to improve and become the person you want to be. I can tell you from experience, the people who actually cared about me said the thing maybe I didn't want to hear at the time, but in the long run, I respect them. I love those people. And you have to be that person for people. You have to be the person who's willing to be kind, not nice. say the thing they need to hear, which maybe is not interpreted as nice, and know when to do what. When someone's super emotional and super frustrated, maybe that's not the time to be quote unquote kind and tell them exactly the negative thing. Maybe you have to be nice, but you have to balance and do both. You have to be assertive and be kind and do what's right for them in the long term, and then know when to dial it down, when to pull it back, and when to simply just be nice, kind, and nice. And now, if you want to be somebody who's also a great leader, and again, this is just me looking at what the best leaders do. I've been captains on teams before, but what I have noticed from much better captains than me is that they help everybody channel emotions. They help people to, they notice, okay, everybody's frustrated. Let's channel this into something. They notice when people are riding high and feeling really good, and they call people out, and they are kind. They say what needs to be said, that, hey, guys, we're getting too confident. We're getting too cocky. We're overthinking this team, or we're underestimating what's going to happen in this game. They call out what needs to happen. And this is why it's so key, is because great players who understand these emotions help understand how to get people on the same page. They create a storyline for people to buy into, that we're moving towards the right direction. These are all these little nuances. And so if you want to be a great leader, what I recommend is that, number one, you understand how to be emotionally intelligent. So you can read into books about emotional intelligence. You can watch more videos. You can follow some stuff that I'll dig into. You can understand the leadership balance of when you need to be kind versus when you need to be nice, and understand what that means and how to have those conversations. You want to be effective at knowing what to say before games, what to say after games. And oftentimes before games is about hyping people up and being nice generally. But in preparation, a lot of times it's about being kind and knowing what people need to hear, and being assertive and sometimes more aggressive, and sometimes you have to be mean. But it's the right thing to do to get people to get what they need out of the situation. And so fundamentally, leadership, emotional intelligence, the mental game, having a clear understanding of how to improve yourself and your teammates, all this stuff, it's all mental tools. And a lot of times we will argue that mental game is not that important, that maybe we don't need to worry about it. It's so important. It's fundamental to all of the things we do, because taking action and going and doing the preparation work is mental. Everything comes from the mind. It all originates. Where do you think actions originate from? It originates in the brain. The brain tells the body what to do. The brain is the driver of the car. It is the driver of the body. And so if you're not working on these skills and building out these tools, then you're holding yourself back. And if you want to be a great leader on a team, you want to get opportunities and make it to higher levels simply because of how great of a leader and person you are, well, then you have to figure out what that is and build those tools and add those into your identity. Learn how to take control of your mental game. Because once you do that, then you can help your teammates do the same. And when everybody's dialed in, when everybody's really focused, that's when you're going to have a more cohesive team. You're going to have the best chance of getting the most out of your physical ability. So I hope that helps. If you guys want to dig in, you want to go deeper, we have a free school group, which will be linked below, which you can get started with all this free training and how to start taking advantage of the mental game and building a true mental game. And then if you want to go deeper and work with us, you can apply to work with us. So I hope you enjoyed this one. Hope you have a great week. Absolutely crushed this walk or this bus ride or whatever you were doing while you listened to this. Maybe it was some workout, some zone 2. And I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you guys next week.